Whenever we think of sex work, we just think you're having sex with someone for money,
Mm-hmm.
which, I mean, let's be real.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Sex Positivity Unfiltered, where we talk about sex and we are not polite about it. My name is Lyndsey Murray.
And I'm Denise Stratton.
And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about sexual surrogacy, which may be a term that a lot of you are not aware of. And so we're hoping to give you some knowledge that maybe is very new to you. And the questions we're hoping to answer today are, first of all, what is sexual surrogacy? Also, how it differs from sex work, and who would most benefit from seeing a sexual surrogate. Denise, I'm curious your thoughts. I mean, I am the one that brought up this topic for us to do, and I know that it was new for you. And so, what did you think when I first, started talking about this? Or,
man, this was a topic that when you first asked me if I knew what sexual surrogacy was, the thought in my brain was very different than what I got out of Google, right? You said sexual surrogacy, so I just automatically thought it was someone that you use to have sex with that's not your partner, right?
mm-hmm.
Which is somewhat true, but okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I plugged it into Google. And I got the AI overview now because I guess Google does AI now. But yeah, a sexual surrogate, also known as a surrogate partner,
Mm-hmm.
is a trained professional who works with clients in a therapeutic setting to help them overcome sexual challenges and improve their sexual health and well-being. When I hear that, I was like, okay, so in my ignorant first thought mind, I was like, okay, it sounds kind of like a sex worker,
Mm-hmm.
but for mental health.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Kind of true, but not really. Not at all. So what I learned was that sexual surrogates work in what's called a triangle model.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So they work with the therapist.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's like a 3-person team. You have the client's relationship with both of them, and then the client and then the therapist relationship with the sexual surrogate as well.
Yeah.
So I mean, everyone's speaking, everyone's giving feedback, everyone's taking notes.
Yeah.
And it's a very structured therapeutic session that the sex therapist also gets to help navigate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And so it's really, you're right. It is called a surrogate partner, or you might even hear surrogate partner therapy, because you really have to view this as as a type of therapy,
Okay.
right? And I think that's a big difference between going to see a sex worker and then going to see a sexual surrogate. And so you've kind of already said this, but a sexual surrogate is really designed to help a person become more comfortable with their body, with their emotional and physical skills, and getting more comfortable with intimacy in general, right? So when you go to see a sexual surrogate, normally you might see them for 6 months to a year, right? And they recommend weekly sessions. Some people do every other week. Some people do twice a week. It really just depends on what you financially can do, because it's not cheap to go to a sexual surrogate. But then also what the need is, right? When you're going to a sexual surrogate, it's very in-depth. It's very structured. There's a contract of consent. There's a lot of detail that goes into it. When you go to see a sex worker, the focus is on sexual gratification, and that's it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So there's really a huge difference there. It is a triangle model, like you said. And the way it works, for someone to go and see a sexual surrogate, you're going to have a referral from a sex therapist. So
Okay.
I've had a couple of clients that have gone to see a sexual surrogate or a surrogate partner. And typically how I decide if that would be a good recommendation or not, because not everyone needs to go see a sexual surrogate. But if I have someone that is really struggling with, sexual anxiety, physical or mental disabilities, fears around intimacy, body dysmorphia, even assistance after gender confirmation surgery can be one. If someone is new to how their body looks now and is really afraid to get sexual with someone, given that they're transitioning, let's say,
Fair.
that might be a good reason to go see a sexual surrogate. Someone who's never had sex before but wants to, but is really nervous to do so, or maybe has never really had that deep physical contact with someone. Or even if they're struggling with erectile dysfunction, vaginismus, sexual function overall, right? So if there's if there's some kind of struggle there that is a barrier to them being intimate with someone else, that might be a good reason, right? To give a referral. And so when someone goes to see a sexual surrogate, they have to be seeing a therapist. It's a requirement. I don't think you can just go like on your own and just be this two-way relationship with the surrogate and the client. There needs to be a therapist there, because then you're getting therapy two different ways. Like with the sexual surrogate, it's not only emotional, but it's physical as well. There's going to be physical touch. And sometimes that eventually includes sex. Maybe sometimes it doesn't. With the sex therapist is strictly talk therapy.
Oh, okay.
There's no physical touch. There's really a lot of processing of what's happening with the surrogate.
Okay.
Right? So it's kind of this like holistic model that you want to do. So going off of that question, like what's the difference between sex work and a sexual surrogate? Sexual surrogacy is much more involved.
Yeah. I also saw that when the whenever your therapy ends, your sexual surrogacy also ends too. Like, so they're very much intertwined.
Yeah.
Like you can't do, like you said, you can't do one without the other.
Exactly.
So it seems in my mind, you're getting pretty much an advanced, kind of an extreme therapy. You have the talk therapy that most people get with a sex therapist, but then you do get the physical thing, which nobody gets with a sex therapist, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Sex therapy is never physical. I just want to clear that up right now, because maybe people don't know that. But yeah, when you go to see a sex therapist, it's always going to be talk therapy. They might recommend you like physical exercises to do at home by yourself or with a partner. They might recommend that to you, and you do that in the privacy of your own home, but you'll never have physical contact with the therapist. With the surrogate, you will have physical contact. You'll have kind of a mix of, like, especially in the beginning when you're going to see a surrogate, it's not like you just jump in and start touching each other. It's kind of a slow process at the beginning to build rapport, get comfortable with each other, and decide what steps are we going to take, right? Like what kind of touch is going to come first, and then later on, like maybe our clothes are off, and then later on, like, is sex going to happen at some point? Like you build, it's honestly like building a contract with the surrogate, and every person has different needs, right? So it just kind of like depends. It's very, you ease into it, I guess I should say.
So a sexual surrogate, just to clear it up, a sexual surrogate it is possible for them to have sex with their clients.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what it's sounding like to me, if I like relate it to the medical industry, it sounds like a sexual surrogate is kind of a mix between a counselor and a physical therapist.
Yeah.
Like, that's what it feels like.
That would be like a good way to put it. And a lot of them, like a lot of sexual surrogates, like the one that I'm thinking of, the sexual surrogate that I've worked with is also like a clinical sexologist, also works in the medical field, like has a lot of that knowledge, background, and training. And there's also an organization you can get certified through to become a surrogate. So not just anyone can like pop up and say like, I'm a surrogate, I can have sex with your clients. Like, it's not like that. It's going to be professional individuals who are the surrogates. Yeah. So they have a lot of knowledge of how to be sensitive and delicate in this realm with someone to help them reach like whatever goal that they have.
Man, when I looked up what is a sexual surrogate, I did both Google and I did YouTube, and the second most question was, how is it different from a sex worker, right? So yeah, I can understand, because again, whenever we think of sex work, we just think you're having sex with someone for money, which, I mean, let's be real, a sexual surrogate in that general sense technically is
kind of true.
Yeah, it's kind of true.
Yeah.
But they're not, like you said, it's not about sexual gratification. I actually saw a bunch of differences here. So sex work just in general is more of a customer service type thing, where they're just there, like you said, for gratification, but the person who kind of dictates the session is the client. Like the services are based on the client's requests and their preferences. Whereas it seems like sexual surrogacy, I mean, you're working with a therapist, you're trying to overcome troubles with sex and intimacy. They're trying to leave you with skills, it seems like, in order to work up to actually having a partner and or an intimate relationship with someone.
Yeah.
And what I liked is, you said it has structured sessions. So it seems more like, it seems more like a physical therapist session where they're just trying to give you, your physical body the ability to do things eventually, right? Like to do like work up, like you said, work up to it. And I like that. And I like that it's used by medical providers. And unlike a lot of sex work in the US, I was told it's legal.
It is legal, yeah.
Okay.
It is legal. Well, I guess I should say it's not illegal. There's not a lot of like law around it. It's kind of like open to interpretation. But I don't know any surrogates who have ever gotten into any legal trouble for the work that they do. I'm in this like sex therapist group, and like people will ask questions, and I think someone asked in there like, hey, have y'all ever heard of anyone getting legal trouble with sexual surrogacy? And the overwhelming answer was no.
Okay.
No one's ever gotten any
I mean,
legal
again,
trouble.
when you said training and certification, that seems very professional to me. When I was looking it up, it says the International Professional Surrogates Association ensures that its members receive training, achieve competency, and maintain a specific code of ethics.
Yeah.
So just in order for you to have this career, you have to be certified, which is something that you don't have to be certified to be a sex worker. Like that's usually not. You might have to get some health checks and screenings if you're working with an agency, but I don't know of that industry of anyone having to get any type of education.
No, you wouldn't have to. And in this realm, you definitely do. And I'm glad that there's ethics around it, because that's something you all like as a sex therapist. If you're referring a client to work with a surrogate, you always want to vet them, right? You don't want to send them to someone who's going to take advantage of them, who's going to be not careful or careless. Like you have to be really careful with this stuff. With the surrogate that I've used, I pulled up her. She has like a frequently asked questions, and she has a contract, and she will go over what will happen in the case of like, let's say you grow feelings for me, which is very normal to happen. Like even with the surrogate, you're not in a relationship with them, but how could you not?
Yeah.
Like,
a lot of people tie in intimacy with, love. Yeah.
I think you run the risk of developing feelings, and I think surrogates handle that really well. That doesn't mean that it ends, like the relationship ends. It just means, hey, we'll process it together. We'll talk about it. We'll let that be okay. But with the recognition of you and I are not in a relationship, we'll never be in a relationship. It's kind of like, it reminds me of, honestly, a therapeutic relationship. Like if I had a client that had feelings for me, that wouldn't end the therapeutic relationship necessarily. I mean, if there were like lines crossed, if someone was like trying to constantly push that boundary, that would be different. But simply having feelings doesn't mean the relationship ends. We would just talk about it of like, hey, I'm someone in your life that is really kind to you, that's empathetic to you, that's listening to you, that's guiding you. And like you might have feelings about that, right?
Have you ever had that happen?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Or at least the clients never told me that they had feelings for me. But if they ever did, I wouldn't like let that freak me out. We would just process it together, and then we would just know, this is not going to develop further from like the relationship that we've established. And even in her contract, because this is a sexual relationship, or this is like an intimate relationship, it could be sexual. She'll go over like, getting tested for STIs. Like some people, like when you go to see a surrogate, I think where my mind typically goes is someone who doesn't have a partner, and so they need to go see a surrogate. But you could have a partner, or maybe you've had sexual partners before, but you're still having some kind of barrier that's keeping you from like reaching whatever goal you have. And so you go and see a surrogate. And so it's smart that the surrogate is like, make sure you're getting tested, because you and I are going to have physical contact, right? So the contract is really thorough of
interesting.
What the relationship is like, and then what to do if, I don't know, that ever risks crossing a boundary or something.
So you as a therapist, how did you find your sexual surrogate therapist you worked with?
Another sex therapist referred me to her.
Oh, good. So it is so it's a good community that kind of, that's cool.
Yeah, and I like when it's referred by someone else that you trust. It makes it a lot easier than having to like randomly find someone, because having to find a surrogate on your own, I think, is really hard. Like there's not a lot of advertised sexual surrogates. So knowing someone else who's in this field who's used one, who's like, oh, this person is amazing, I trust them wholeheartedly. I was like, okay, good. I trust you and you trust them, so I can probably trust them. You know what I mean? So that's how I found out about the one that I use.
Okay. No, that's badass. So do all sex therapists kind of use a sexual surrogate?
I don't think all of them do, but they can.
Okay.
If that makes any sense. Like,
Okay.
because I've only had 1 or 2 clients in all my experience that have gone to use one.
Yeah.
And so I don't think it's necessarily a common service.
Okay.
But I think it's one that we should be aware of because, like, I work mostly with couples. And so couples, the surrogacy doesn't typically come up.
Yeah.
In my experience, it's more been with someone who is single and is really, like, nervous to have sex for the first time and has a lot of fear, has a lot of anxiety, maybe doesn't like their body, that kind of thing. So that's typically, like, who I've recommended to a surrogate. It's not common, but we should at least be aware of that service, you know, because it's a really nice service to know about.
Yeah, I didn't even know that was a thing that you could, again, legally do. Like, that's wow. So the clients that you've seen, or in your experience being a sex therapist, for you to offer it, like, I assume it has to be like an extreme level of anxiety, because I feel like whenever we say anxiety, sexual anxiety, that's something that a majority of people kind of experience in a way. What kind of fear would they have to have for you to think that would be a good recommendation?
Someone who has never been able to enter into a relationship at all because of their level of anxiety. You know, if someone has had partners before, maybe they even have a partner now, but they're feeling some anxiety, there's techniques you can do in sex therapy to talk that through, to process it, that would be enough, right? But if I have someone who is worried, like, hey, I'm getting older and I really want to have a relationship, but I've never had one, and I find myself, like, not being able to even initiate that or entertain the idea or accept any, like, I am just so closed off to that, even though I really want that. Yeah. Like, the older I get, the harder it gets for me to even be open to that, because I don't know how to overcome this, like, fear that I have, and they don't really have a lot of experience. That might be a case where it's like a surrogate could be really good because that's someone who could provide you with that experience, right?
That's awesome.
And the surrogate I use, she'll even kind of walk through with them how to initiate asking for a date. How do you accept when someone, and, like, she'll even do that if that's something that the person, like, wants to experience, right? So
that brings me to my next question. Do you know, like, kind of how these sessions go? Because I imagine you have a lot of the guidance and the feedback that you're giving to the therapist. Like, these are my notes from this client. This is what they need to work on. Yeah. Do you know what your sexual surrogate does as far as, like, being able to, like, what the sessions would look like to tailor to that?
Yeah. Yeah. Because we talk about it. We're in touch. We'll share notes if we need to. We'll talk about it. Most of the sessions are done in private, especially because you're talking about, like, physical touch, maybe your shirt's off, like, all that's going to be done in private. But sometimes, like, especially in the beginning, because, again, you're easing into it, she might just go on, like, a coffee date with the client. Like, again, you establish it's not a real date, but it's like, I'm giving you that experience just to kind of see, like, where they're at, right? Because there are a lot of nerves around even that kind of intimacy with someone. Wow. To, like, go on a first date, to go out, right? So, and again, it just depends on the person. Like, some people might not need that. And I think the surrogate does a good job of establishing, okay, that might be too low of a level for you to start. Maybe you don't need to start there. Maybe we start somewhere else, Okay. So it's pretty cool. No,
that is really awesome because, okay, whenever you think about sex work, I think about the ethical nature of sex work. A lot of us see it as this, this hush-hush thing that you do for gratification. But I don't even want to say hush hush. We know it's this thing that people do to get gratification because maybe they're not getting it in their own life or they want more experience or whatever. But I do know that a lot of people will seek out a sex worker or an escort just because they don't have that experience, right? They don't have the ability to go out and just meet someone on their own and engage in those activities. So they seek a professional. And so most people, when they're seeking a professional, they think of sex worker.
Yeah.
the fact that there is this industry where it's
Mhm.
literally structured, it's professional, and it's tailored to giving you that experience that you are missing out on.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, because I would think, like, for some people, if your first sexual interaction is with a sex worker, I would imagine that's really intimidating because it's a lot all at once. If
True.
you've never had
Yeah.
that experience, like, I don't know personally, but I would imagine it's intimidating.
Yeah, but I've seen like again, I don't know other than in the porn industry, I don't know any sex workers that are in that realm of
Yeah.
that industry. I've seen YouTube videos of like Jubilee or things where they'll bring in and they'll have someone interview. And a lot of the
Mhm.
sex workers do say that a lot of their clients are pretty much just looking for connection. And that's
Mhm.
pretty like they think sex work is very ethical and very needed because of that aspect of the industry. You have a lot of Johns who are just wanting an experience that they never had before, or maybe I think I heard one girl say that she had a John who reached out to her because he had cancer. He was diagnosed with cancer
Mhm.
and he didn't want to get into a relationship with someone and like put that on them, right? I mean, there's so many reasons why you would need that physical connection in a professional way, and the
Yeah.
fact that it's tailored with therapy in this industry is just to me
Uh-huh.
so beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a really nice it's a really nice service.
Hell
Like people can
yeah.
really benefit from it. And I think there's a misconception like, oh, it's just careless and not ethical and it's just another form of sex work. And I have nothing against sex workers. Like,
Agreed.
let me be
Agreed. Yeah.
clear
Yeah.
because even in the example you just gave, if someone is dying and they want to have a physical relationship with someone, they don't want to get into like a romantic relationship with someone. They want it to just be what it is for them. And a sex worker can do that for them. Like, that's also really beautiful to me.
Awesome. Yeah.
Great. Right. And so this is just like a different form of that.
With
And yeah,
therapy,
with
like that's
therapy.
what I'm.
Yeah.
That's the beautiful part.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Cause you really want to make sure everyone is on the same page, like if, I don't know, the client says they're okay with what's happening and then I've never had that happen, but like if I heard like a different story, like, no, I'm actually really freaked out and like it's too fast for me or
Yeah.
whatever, like we just want to know that, right? So we're all on the same page. So
I love it. I'm gonna act as the rebuttals now, because this is a very, I don't want to say maybe intimidating power
mhm,
dynamic that can
mhm,
happen. So, as far as boundaries and consents that can be crossed, like I
mhm.
guess how do you prevent those? Is that just the contract? Like, is it
It's part of the contract.
okay?
Yeah. I
Okay.
think you have to be really proactive.
Okay.
Like you kind of have, like as a professional, you kind of have to know like what could happen. And then you talk about it way ahead of time,
And are you
right? Like
constantly like
you consistently check in about it.
okay?
You
Okay.
consistently check in. I feel like and like that's something you do in therapy too. It's
Okay.
like even if I have a client, and we agree like, oh, these are the goals, or here's what you want to do. I'll consistently check in. Like, is that still your goal? Is that something you're comfortable with now? Is there something else? Like you're always wanting to check in with them. And it's the same with like boundaries and consent or what are we consenting to. I always view it, and I think surrogates do as well, like whatever the contract is, um, it's not like the contract is set in stone and that's it. You just have to always be aware that some of this could change, could adjust depending on all sorts of factors, right? So you're just like kind of like proactive about it, I think.
The other two rebuttals I have is it seems like sex work, but like you said, there is training and certification.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, do you know, I guess, what kind of training they go to? Like, is it just like a quick class, or is it? I mean, it seems like it would have to
No,
be more rigorous.
now this is an area where I don't know
Okay.
exactly. Yeah,
Okay.
I don't know exactly like what training they go through, but I know even on the like the certification or like the association website, I think they can give you an overview of what all is involved. But it's definitely not I know for a fact it's not like an easy peasy process. Like
Okay. Good.
they really want to make sure that whoever's becoming a surrogate is going to be good and ethical and do their best not to create harm.
Got
They're
it.
very serious about that.
Yeah, and that's the last rebuttal I have,
Mhm.
is that it seems like, it from the outside, it does seem like the client's welfare and safety is the most important.
Yes.
So I'm assuming, like you said, regular check-ins with every single point of the
Mhm.
triangle is
Mhm.
necessary.
Yeah.
Okay. No, I mean, this is badass. So I guess when you say the people who could find the sexual surrogates useful, that was a long
Mhm.
list, but you've
Mhm.
only recommended it, you said, twice in your.
Yeah.
So these
Yeah.
are mostly extreme cases. I'm curious,
Mm.
when you mention it to your clients, what are the reactions that you normally get?
The reaction I normally get is a good one.
Really?
Yeah. It's
Ah.
kind of like, oh, I didn't know that was an option. And if there's another person who can help me with this, I'm definitely interested.
Okay.
Because I think when someone like I'm going to backtrack a little bit with kind of some history about this, but sexual surrogacy or sexual partner therapy is really based in the techniques that are created by Masters and Johnson. And so that's William H. Masters and Virginia E. Johnson. Do you know about
I
Masters and
have no
Johnson?
idea who
Masters and Johnson, they really pioneered the research into nature of human sexual response, and they created a technique called sensate focus in 1970. And sensate focus is a technique that I'll use in my practice actually quite often. And so sensate focus, there is basically the point of sensate focus is to remove any pressure or anxiety from like touch and sex. And so the goal is not like orgasm, it's not intercourse, it's not erection, there's no expectation whatsoever, but it's an intimacy exercise that partners do together. There's a way that you can do sensate focus on your own too if you don't have a partner. But like when I think of a sexual surrogate, there's someone who can do sensate focus with my client who maybe doesn't have a partner.
Can you explain what like the sensate
focus
focus
is? Yeah.
is?
So sensate focus is it's a touching exercise. And so like I'll use it a lot when there's a lot of sexual anxiety, because I'll hear from clients maybe like, as soon as we start touching each other, in my mind, it has to lead to sex, it has to lead to an orgasm, it has to lead to whatever it is. And then I psych myself out, and then it's not even like fun, right? I hear that quite often, actually.
Interesting.
Very often. So sensate focus removes all that pressure, because what you do is you take turns touching each other, and it starts off in a non-sexual way. Like you're touching parts of your partner's body that are like their legs, their stomach, their arms, nothing sexual.
Okay.
And the whole point of it is you're paying attention to when your anxiety pops up, and then you're bringing the focus back to pressure, texture, and temperature. So it's like you're paying attention to what's the pressure that they're touching me, what's the temperature of the room, what's the temperature of their hands, what's the texture, right? Is their skin kind of rough? Is it really soft? The whole point of bringing the focus back to that is to get you out of the anxiety. Like, I don't want to be mentally distracted. I want to be in the moment, and I want to know what's going on in my body. So it doesn't have to even be pleasurable.
Yeah.
It's not like you did it wrong if you didn't enjoy it. But even being able to recognize, I didn't really like that because of like these things, or I did really like that, right? And you do that with each other like 2 to 3 times a week. Like you make a practice out of it.
Okay.
And then it's gradual in terms of like, if both partners feel like their anxiety begins to lower, like, hey, the non-sexual touch, I was able to really stay in the moment, right? And that's becoming more normal for me. I'm able to name exactly what I feel in my body. I'm able to name the touch. I'm able to name the pressure. And it just feels like maybe more natural. Then you can go to like phase 2, which does include genital touch. But again, it's not intercourse or sexual activity. It's not like, I'm giving someone a hand job for the whole time. It's just that can be incorporated now. I can touch their private parts, and then I'm going to go back and touch other parts. And you do it from a self-interest lens. Like you don't do it to please your partner,
Yeah.
you touch only where you want to touch.
Oh.
Yeah.
So what it's sounding like to me is
Mm-hmm.
it's a level of mindfulness that you're
Yes.
practicing,
Yeah. It's
right?
total mindfulness. Yeah.
But at the same time, you're being very analytical. So you're analyzing, instead of you analyzing the situation and your feelings and your
Mm-hmm.
anxiety around it, you're just basically just analyzing the bare bones physical
Mm-hmm.
what is
Mm-hmm.
happening right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, exactly. And for some people it's hard to do that at first, and
Mm.
there will be feelings that come up. And I always just tell clients, I'm like, if you have feelings that come up, again, that's not wrong. You're just making a note of it, and then we come to session and we process it together. Right? There was a
Mm.
certain feeling that came up. What does that mean for you? Why do you think that came up? Right? What is like another thought you could have about that? And so you're just processing it with them, and then you gradually go through the phases, because let's say you go through the phase where you can incorporate genital touch. Then, phase 3 and 4, you maybe you can incorporate like intercourse as an example. And then when I'm saying this, I'm thinking of like a straight couple in my head, but like queer couples can do this too. But when I say intercourse, I'm in my head, I'm thinking of like a straight, like male female couple as the example. But you can incorporate that in as the phases go on, and it's still with the purpose of pressure, texture, temperature. What am I feeling? And then couples, if they do go through every phase, towards the end, you're not really doing an exercise anymore. You've grown to kind of like the anxiety. The goal is like the anxiety lowers so much and you are more mindful that now it becomes a source of pleasure and not a source of anxiety. Right? It's kind of like the overall gist of it. Sensei focus, I could do a whole episode about. There's a lot more involved in it, but this is very much like rooted in Masters Johnson like teachings.
Okay.
They came up with this technique. So sensei focus is something that a sexual surrogate will incorporate with the client most times, right? And so again, because I said the surrogate plan, the contract is gradual, sensei focus is very parallel to that. In the beginning, we're just touching non-sexual. We work our way up. And we're evaluating where the client is at every step of the way to make sure they're ready for the next, stage. So yeah, it's rooted in Masters and Johnson. There's actually a show, I think, called Masters and Johnson, or it's called, I can't think of the name, but there's a show about them.
Okay. Yeah. So, all right. So take me through take me through a flow chart a little bit. So let's say I come to your office, I'm a new client, and maybe I have sexual trauma, right? I feel like that's that would be a really good way.
That's another example of someone who might benefit from.
Yes. Okay. Perfect. So yeah, I have some type of sexual trauma. So I no longer, if I get penetrated, I no longer like, it doesn't make me feel good. It creates a lot of anxiety. It just, I have trauma around that area.
Yeah.
So I come to you. You see all the check boxes where you might offer sexual surrogacy. What would the process go like that after? Like, would you contact the sexual surrogate yourself, or would you have them how?
So I would probably, I don't know that I would jump right to surrogacy. Okay. I would see, are there mindfulness techniques I can give them to try on their own that would work? Okay. And sometimes that's all they need, right? So that would be step number 1, is like, let's try something that they can do now, right? And maybe that's all they need. And if they have a partner, you can incorporate their partner. Maybe they try sensate focus, right, at home. If we went that route and they were still really feeling a lot of anxiety and maybe they needed like further assistance, I would contact the surrogate first. 1, because I think that's a lot for someone to contact the surrogate on their own. Like, I think that would take a lot of courage, I think it's intimidating. I think it takes a lot of courage. And in my experience, the client feels better with me reaching out first. Okay. And 1, I'm making sure the surrogate has the space. Like, hey, do you have the time to see this, potential client? And I wouldn't, when I reach out, I don't give a lot of specific information because I don't want to break confidentiality, because they might not go see, let's say the surrogate's like, no, I don't have space. So I don't give a ton of info. I just say, hey, I have someone that I think could benefit from your service. You have the space. Yeah. And then, I would go back to the client and say, hey, they have an opening. And I would ask them, now that I've talked to the surrogate, are you comfortable reaching out to them? Or do you want me to connect the two of you? right? And then from that point, I would have them sign a release of information so that I can talk to the surrogate and give specific information.
Okay.
Like I have to get their permission first to do that. I would have them sign a release, and maybe they're cool reaching out on their own, or I connect the two of them, like probably via email, right? Like, hey, now you have their contact information. Now you have the client's contact information. And then what the surrogate does is, at least the one that I go to, will have like a 2-hour intake with them where you're not a client yet. The intake is like, let me explain my services. Let me explain the contract. Let me answer any questions you might have. And it's really, it's an in-depth intake to really just to let the client know, like, here's everything you need to know before you decide if you want to move forward with this.
It's kind of the similar thing. Don't you do the same thing with your clients as well? Like almost a little bit of a, not an interview process, but like.
Yeah, it's an intake process.
Okay,
yeah, it's similar to, right. So it's like in therapy, it might be a little bit different because when you have an intake, like before I have an intake in therapy, I have them sign all of the consent documents and everything because it's like assuming you're going to be a client. But I'll let new clients know if at any point you don't want to do this or I'm not the right therapist for you, I'll be glad to refer you out. Right? It's not set in stone. But I think this is a little different because it's kind of like before you agree to anything, we'll have this intake first.
Okay.
Right? Because there's just so much like information. And then if they decide, yeah, I want to move forward with this, then they sign all the paperwork, they sign the contract, and then they really go from there. And then we decide, how often do we want to keep doing sex therapy in comparison to how often you're doing surrogate partner therapy? Because it is expensive. Like sex therapy is expensive. Surrogacy is even more expensive.
I bet. Wow.
So some clients may have no issue with that.
Okay.
They're like, whatever the cost is, I'll do it. And some of them may not have the means to do that. So then you're deciding, like, let's say I had a client come weekly, but they can't do weekly with me and then weekly with the surrogate because it'd be too much money. Now we're just all kind of collaborating. Do you and I want to do every other week, and then you do every other week with the surrogate, right? You don't really want to do any less than that because then you kind of don't, it's hard to see progress if you go too infrequently. But you just decide on the frequency and then you just go from there.
That's awesome. Okay, so back to my scenario. So now we're at the point where you've introduced me to the sexual surrogate. I have sexual trauma, right? From there, before me and the sexual surrogate meet, do you guys discuss like what the game plan might be, like you and the sexual surrogate?
Yeah, I left that part out. Yes. So whenever they when the client signs the release, probably before they even have the intake with the surrogate, because I have the release, like I have permission, like I can tell the surrogate what their issue is and what their goals are, what I know so far. I would have a phone call with the surrogate to tell them all of that. I would say, hey, here's my experience with the client. Here's what they're reporting to me. Here's like their history. And here's where they're wanting to go with this. So that way, when they have the intake with them, they already kind of have a clue in of like, I know where you're at. Let me like confirm, right? Here's what Lyndsey told me. Is that all accurate? Because I think that helps shape how the intake is going to go. Because like if you meet with someone that has trauma versus someone who maybe doesn't have sexual trauma but's never been in a relationship, I feel like the conversation is going to be different. It's going to be similar because the service is not different, but the context is different.
Yes, of course.
So that's going to really impact like how the intake will go. So it's nice for them to have that information ahead of time. Yeah.
So, so then everyone has met, and then from there, because it seems like everyone's giving feedback to each other. When you say like you guys kind of work at the game plan together, is it like, are you kind of guiding the sexual surrogate? Like, these are the points I kind of, I need you to work on, I need you to hit? Or is it more of a like, you tell them these are the issues I'm seeing? What would you recommend? Like, who kind of, I guess, takes the reins? Or is it really together?
Honestly, I would say the client takes the reins.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, that's how I view therapy too, is like, beautiful. I'm never the driver of the goal, and like neither is the surrogate. Like we'll give our suggestions, like, hey, based on what we know about you, here's kind of what we're thinking, but we're always going to get their feedback what's your opinion? How are you feeling about this? If there's something you don't like about it, we can change and adjust it. Like, the client really has the reins, right?
Okay.
And so I don't necessarily view myself as the guide. I think something you said of like, I call with like information I know, and I'll give my suggestion like, hey, what I'm hearing from the client is like, this is really important to them. I would definitely like to see that as part of the plan. But I give the surrogate their autonomy too.
Okay, yeah.
Like I've only had 1 or 2 clients do this, so I've never had this issue. But I've never had an issue where we've talked about the plan or I've gotten the specifics and I've been like, oh, I don't know about that. Usually they really know what they're doing. And
That's
so when I
awesome.
hear it, I'm like, hey, as long as the client is okay with that, then that sounds like a really awesome plan to me.
And then you guys just as a team go about
Yeah.
wow, this is a really good service, guys. We need to be publicizing this service more.
Yeah.
So I guess my next question is for the clients that have sought out this service before, have any of them completed it? Like, what's the testimonies?
I haven't had anyone complete it yet.
Okay.
I have someone who's still in it.
Okay.
So
do they have good feedback? Or are they making
Yeah, good feedback, because it's like it's a big service and it is very intimate, clients can sometimes be scared to give feedback or ask questions. So sometimes when I'm meeting with them, I'm just trying to encourage and empower them. I'm like, hey, if you're unsure about what you're doing with them, or you feel confused or you feel unsure, like, I'm encouraging you to bring that up to them.
Okay.
Right? If I have to talk to surrogate about it, I will. But I always want it to come from the client. Like, I want to empower them, right? Like, make this experience what you want it to be. And the surrogate can handle feedback. They can handle, like, whatever's on your mind is good for them to know. And honestly, that's kind of how it works in a relationship. It's like, if you enter into a relationship, it should be an open, safe space to just express, that made me feel uncomfortable, or I actually really enjoyed this part, but I'm not sure about this part. Like, all that is okay to talk about.
Awesome. Wow. Because that's one thing that I found about therapy that I wasn't necessarily expecting. Again, you have just this thought in your mind of what therapy is, and it's this old white guy in the corner taking notes while you're on the couch.
Laying on the couch, yeah. And they're like, tell me about your mom when you were 5. Yeah.
Exactly. But what I found when I actually attended is really is a space where you get to talk to someone with no judgment, no attachment, no, like, literally just say what you want to say, and then they help you out with tools and develop skills. And that's exactly what it's sounding like with the sexual surrogate too. That's amazing. So I guess if this is sounding awesome to you and it's sounding like a service that you might want, what would be the first steps? It would be to contact a sex therapist first?
You would need to get with a sex therapist first.
Okay.
Yeah. And then from there, if that's something you want to do, a sex therapist can help you with that.
That's awesome. Awesome. Yeah. I this is amazing.
Yeah.
And the sexual surrogate that you use, like, do you have a male and a female? Because I would assume that it can also be used. We just came off of Pride Month, guys, so it can also be used for people who are have maybe queer thoughts and feelings and kind of want to explore that as well.
Yeah. The one that I work with is a female, is a woman.
Okay.
I do know of a sexual surrogate in New York City who I had a call with like a couple of years ago, which of course I can't coordinate with them. I only am licensed in Texas, so I don't know anyone who would be in New York who could benefit from that. But I just had a call with him, and I was like, hey, like, you offer a cool service. Like, that's good to know. And he works mostly with queer folks.
Oh,
yeah. So it's kind of like it could be like another specialty almost of like, this is an added layer of, if you're queer, I have experience working with queer people as a surrogate. And so that's like an added layer of comfort,
As a queer woman, that's a service I could say is amazing. Because a lot of times gay people end up getting hurt because they'll fall in love with someone or someone who's just kind of really using them to experiment.
Yeah.
Right. To kind of just, which, coming from someone who did experiment a little bit with, I guess, straight people, and you do need to have those experiences where you kind of try things and you go out there. But at the same time, it's a catch-22 because you could also be affecting someone else because you're kind of using them to just kind of try out, if
Uh-huh.
you like this or not. So the
Yeah.
fact that, man, there's an actual professional service that you could
Mm-hmm.
use to kind of see if, if you're a woman, if a woman's touch feels nice, or if you're a guy, if a guy's touch feels nice. Like
Yeah.
that's something that we need, guys. Okay, that's
Yeah.
great.
There's even like professional cuddlers who just cuddle with people.
I saw that when I was doing the. I didn't even
yeah.
know that was a thing.
Yep, I have a friend who does that. And even now, like even a professional cuddler, these are really like ethical professionals who are doing this, right? And so the whole point is like, if you're going to someone to experience touch, sex, cuddling, whatever, there are people out there who are doing it the right way. They're not trying to take advantage of you. They're just there to create a safe space for you, to give you that experience, and you know what the relationship is, and it's to empower you to move forward, right? And whatever that looks like for you. So it's kind of exciting.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Ugh, mind blown. All right. I actually kind of want to pose it if you're okay with it.
Sure.
If there's anyone out there who is a professional cuddler or even a sexual surrogate, I don't want to use the one that Lyndsey's using just for privacy. But if one of you are out there and you want to come on the podcast and kind of talk to us, I would love to pick your brain. Like that sounds like I really honestly wish that this service was publicized more.
Right, was more well known.
Yes.
Yeah, and maybe we're on our way to that, which would be awesome.
Would you
one
say
day.
that this is kind of a new industry?
Yeah, I would say it's new. I mean, not super new, but new enough to where like so many people don't know about it. Yeah.
It's badass. Okay, guys. Well, sexual surrogacy, it's a thing. Or
Surrogate partner
partners.
therapy. Yeah, surrogate partner therapy.
Hey. Cool.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. We hope this was a really educational video for you. I know I was very excited to talk about it. Hopefully you learned something new or gave you some insight into this field that maybe you didn't previously know about. As a side note, we are open to listener support. And so if you would like to support us financially for as little as $1 a month, definitely feel free to do so. We have a link in our YouTube profile and same on our podcast profile. If you decide to support us in that way, it just helps us continue to create content, to make our production value even better, and to give you guys the episodes that you really want to hear and that you deserve. So please check that out and let us know what you thought of this episode. If you enjoyed it, if you learned something new, what did you think about it, and what would you like to hear in the future? We're definitely open to listener requests and would love to give you whatever topic that interests you.
Yeah, guys,
All right.
Let us know.
So again, we are Sex Positivity Unfiltered. Remember to stay curious and fuck politeness.